Hi, this is Emily from Kidlit Book Love. I'm going to talk to you about two more really great books for Halloween in the horror gothic genre. I just posted a video with two books for younger kids. These books would be great for kids that are a little bit older, Coraline and The House with a Clock in Its Walls. So I'm going to talk about these each separately. So first let's talk about The House with a Clock in Its Walls. Apparently this was made into a movie. I'd never even heard of it. And it's a John Bellairs mystery. This book, I chose it more because it does fall into the sort of horror gothic theme because of the elements and the literary elements that are involved. But technically it also has mystery elements. It's a John Bellairs mystery as well, and it has fantasy elements. So, and some of the literary elements that classify a book as maybe more horror or gothic would be setting. Setting is always somewhere that's eerie and gloomy and misty, and structures that are really old or ancient or dilapidated, crumbling, a lot of stone, sort of supernatural, ghostly, eerie elements. And you can show this in the scene, setting, language, dialogue, action. There's a lot of ways to show this. So this was a very good book, incredibly good book. I read it in 2 days. The ages for this book, of course, it depends on your child. On its own will have its own reading level. I guess I didn't write it down, but I would say from my experience, probably 3rd through 7th grade, getting a little bit on the old, somewhere in between. This book was before I was born. It was 1973, and it takes place in the 1940s after World War II. So that's what's interesting, and it's about a little boy who's an orphan. So one of the themes in this book is the orphan theme, which we see very common in children's literature, and I've talked about that in a previous video. So he's an orphan. His parents were killed in a car accident. He's on a bus at the beginning on his way to go live with his uncle, who he's never met. And so he goes to live with his uncle, and he thought he wasn't going to like his uncle, but his uncle is really neat and interesting and kind of magical. It turns out his uncle is a warlock. And there's also the theme in this book of kind of an unusual family dynamic and teamwork. And for example, the uncle isn't married, doesn't have any wife or kids, but there's an old lady next door who is, quote, his best friend, and she's always at the house and always, making food for them and doing everything with them. And whenever there's a problem in the book, they're all three teaming up together. So it's like their own version of family. And it kind of shows you in this book that family doesn't have to just be biological, father, mother, and children, siblings. But the uncle is a wizard, or a warlock, I guess, more of a wizard. And his friend, the old lady that lives next door, is a witch. And what's really neat there in this book is the illusions that are set. There's a lot of kind of mystical, magical stuff in here, like in the coat rack in the front of the house. When you go in the house, when you look in the knobs of the coat rack, you can see other worlds. So his uncle makes it really neat because this boy is 10 years old, he's fascinated with history, he loves old battles and the Battle of Waterloo and cannons and history of battles and typical boy stuff. And the uncle makes it where when he looks in certain things, including like the bulbs on the Christmas tree, he can see a scene or a setting in live action happening from another time whenever he wants to. And so there's kind of these neat illusions all around the house. So let me show you the inside. There's the mansion. There are some images in here, but they're all kind of that grainy pencil-like. This is the old lady, the uncle, and Louis, the boy. But it's kind of odd. The uncle keeps fading off into these, like he just goes blank when the clocks start ticking. There's a theme of the constant ticking clock coming from in the walls in this house, and so kind of the theme of the book is time. Time is the theme, and that time is something you can't get back. Time is something that is a non-renewable resource, and the passage of time. So the mystery is to solve where is this ticking coming from. But what makes this kind of horror gothic, of course, is the language and the images. And so this boy is also described by himself as a fat boy with chubby cheeks. He doesn't have any friends. He's kind of an outcast, which is another theme you see in children's literature. And he does make a friend, and he and his friend, there's also the exploration and bravery theme, even against fear in here, the kind of evolving. And they sneak out in the middle of the night. Well, he steals one of his uncle's spells from a book. They sneak out in the night on Halloween and go to a graveyard and see if they can put one of these, let's raise if you're, depending on if this is a risky topic for your child, they want to raise the dead, they want to bring someone from a tomb alive. They think they pick a random tomb, but and they do it on Halloween night. They go to this eerie graveyard, and all the language and the way that that's set kind of gives it this Halloween theme. And they do bring, something happens and all this activity happens, and then they run. Well, then this whole chain of events happens that sets the scene for kind of, what happens toward the end. And there's a whole like wizard battle between good versus evil is the theme, really the main theme in this book. Time and good versus evil. And so they're all good, but then whatever they raise from the dead, so to speak, moves in across the street, and it's this other old lady who was married to the man who originally put the clocks in the walls like decades ago, and she wants to stop time, and her husband had put the clock in the wall in order to reset time to the way the world was before he knows his wife was going to stop it. So she's the one that got back from the dead. So, but there's some really cool wizardry, witch like battles with the whole light show kind of a thing, kind of like at the end of Harry Potter with the whole wand, everything lights up and sparkles kind of a scenario. So those are kind of the things in the book. So as far as, there's some eerie elements, the uncle goes in these kind of eerie trances. As far as setting the scene, let me see if I wrote anything else in my notes you would need to know. Yeah, there's eerie noises, shadows, something tall and dark and shapeless following him around. So the house, or his new room is described as a tall black bed with battlements at the top of the headboard and front board. In the corner was a black mirror that matched the bed, and near it was a black marble fireplace with a coffin-like black clock on its mantelpiece. So a lot of the description of the environment matches kind of the Gothic realm as well. There is some mention of necromancy, which as I said, is bringing back the dead alive. The graveyard scene was really cool. It was really well written, I thought. A lot of details, a lot of great descriptive and imagery words. But there's like the dark sudden wind that rattles the leaves in the night, and it's black out there, blacker than ink. Something black, blacker than night, blacker than ink, spilled into the water from the grave, was oozing from the space between the doors, coming toward them. That's when they ran. Yeah, the graveyard scene, I wrote this down. It was full of elaborate gravestones that showed weeping women leaning against urns, and cupids extinguishing torches, pillars made to look as if it had been broken, and pillars with hands on top, tombstones made in the slope of lambs over the graves of children. So again, this definitely isn't for younger readers, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily tween either. But I love this book, and I'm kind of curious to see the movie now. I generally don't like to see movies from classic books because I only want to remember the original version of the book in my head and not have it all undone when I see the movie. So that's what I think about the House of the Clock and its walls. And I want to talk about Coraline. I'm sure you've heard about Coraline. This came from my Neil Gaiman 3-book, beautiful by Chris Riddell illustrated box set, which I should have had here to show you, but I don't. This is the second time I've analyzed and studied this book, and Coraline is not an orphan, but there's the same, this is definitely, probably of all the books, this would definitely be, and go to my note page, definitely be the most horror Gothic theme of them all. Neil Gaiman is kind of known for that, as in his book, The Graveyard Book, which is a little more complicated reading than this one, and bigger. So Coraline is this kind of eerie little girl who is bored and lonely and feels neglected. Her parents are always busy, and she kind of starts exploring the grounds of this house, and she ends up finding this big black key, and then she explores, finds a little door it goes to, and she goes in through this door. It's kind of has an Alice in Wonderland theme, and I'm convinced of it because I found 2 references that remind me of Alice in Wonderland in the book, which I wrote down. But she goes through this door, and on the other side, it's like this parallel universe. It's her, she goes through this door, the secret door in her house, and on the other side is like a replica of her house, but everything is the same, but different. And she has a set of other parents on the other side. So she has her normal parents, but she goes through this magic door, and on the other side there's the other parents. Then again, this is very Tim Burton-y, very, very, very Tim Burton-y. More Tim Burton-y than Amelia Fang. I guess, most similar, I guess. But the other parents are there, but they're like emotionless, lifeless. They have giant buttons for eyes, and it's really creepy. and they're trying to get Coraline to stay on that side, and Coraline has to like kind of differentiate between, you know, illusion and reality. Well, what's interesting though, you know, and then she goes through this whole sequence of events, and she goes back and forth to the two sides, and then her real parents on the real side go missing, and she thinks the other parents on the other side put them and did something to them, so she has to go figure out where they are. Turns out they're in a snow globe. But what's interesting about this is, I totally forgot what I was going to say. It's a really good book. It's cute. I don't like it as much as The House with the Clock on Its Walls, but this is a classic. You can't go wrong. There are a few illustrations, so there's some risky topics in here. The other mother turns kind of bad, and she shoves her in this creepy cellar where there's dead souls of children, like ghosts. So there's definitely some eerie elements. But here's what the parents on the other side look like. They have buttons for eyes, long craggly fingernails. This is how they're described in the book. And so, you know, this book, well, they turn looking worse, but when she first goes over there, they look more like this. So the theme is bravery and exploration. So there's even language like, she hoped it wasn't a spider. Spiders made her intensely uncomfortable. She followed it anyway, a little nervously, despite the fact that it was dark. So it's like there's an acknowledgement she's afraid, but she goes ahead anyway. So there's a big theme of bravery and exploration. She's exploring things, and she even calls herself an explorer like 5 times. She announces to these neighbors that she's an explorer. She has quite an imagination. So this makes you wonder if it's like Alice in Wonderland. The whole thing is a dream, because prior to her being bored and going to find the key that takes her to that other side, she was wandering the house in her little living room. And I think I have to go back and look. It mentions she sits into a chair, and then suddenly she's bored. She gets up and goes and finds the key. But at the end of the book, when she finally finds her missing parents or whatever, or she escapes out of the other side, finds herself in the living room again, sleepy. I feel like it's indicated maybe she was dreaming the whole time. But she has quite an imagination. She says, you know, when I'm bored, I imagine I was kidnapped by aliens or pirates or something to that effect. Brilliant language in here for setting the scene for the Gothic horror. Her skin was white as paper. Nails were curved and sharp. Her eyes were big black buttons. There's tons of great language. Her mother's hand scuffled off cobwebs or snuck around her neck like a frightened spider. I can't even read my own writing. And there's so many great lines in here. Then she says stuff like, I'll be brave, I am brave. Like, she's giving herself a lot of positive self-talk. So she's exploring, she's using her imagination. You can't really tell if she's dreaming or if it's real or some kind of a magical spell. The other mother's hair drifted around her head like the tentacles of a creature in the deep ocean. Or when she's outdoors, it was not damp like a normal fog or mist. It was not cold and not warm. It felt to Coraline like she was walking into nothing. So it's really, really great settings. She thought she felt a ghost kiss her cheek tenderly, and a small voice whisper into her ear, a voice so faint it was barely there at all, a gentle, wispy, nothing of a voice. So she hushed it and tried to think she was imagining it. The other mother's hair was like wiggling snakes on a warm day. The language is great. You do get a feel more of a little girl perspective. This book felt more like reading a regular novel. You didn't feel so much like the language during the dialogue parts was like a little kid talking, because, you know, I guess maybe Lewis in this book is older than Coraline. So was there any kind of risky topics in here? There's a passage in here she knows that her other mother on the other side doesn't really love her, care about her, and about being a bad mother. And she says doing bad things is okay as long as you don't get caught. Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of similar to The Little Rich, right? So there's nothing in here too risky that I would warn parents of, except for the part about the dead souls. A little bit of a tiny hint, religious hint. But at the end, did I write this down? At the very end, oh yeah, dream indication at the very end. After all that, she goes back outside. She sets up a picnic, caught up in the tightness of the world, curled up like a cat. She didn't notice she had fallen into a dreamless sleep. So she's sitting under a big oak tree by a little water with the cat there, kind of very Alice in Wonderland, how Alice falls asleep under the tree and then she wakes up under the tree. So it makes me wonder if that's what was going on in Neil Gaiman's mind. I don't know. So anyway, definitely a recommendation. It's a classic. But between the two, I would pick this one over this one or both. Thanks everybody for watching, and happy Halloween. And I'll have at least several more videos with more Halloween Gothic horror novels coming up.